Right. So yesterday we talked about things that could sink and float. And we talked about it's not necessarily how heavy something is, but it's also with the density. So if it is more dense than the water, it's going to sink to the bottom. And if it's less dense, it's going to float on top. Today, we're going to talk about a form of transportation. Now, if I drove my minivan into a lake, what would happen to it? It would sink to the bottom, right? It would not be good. If I don't really have a boat, but if I drove a boat into a lake, where would that go? It should float, right? It should stay on top. Now, there is a vehicle that can do both. It can float and it can sink. And it is called a submarine. So today we're going to read a quick book about submarines. We're going to watch a short video, and then we're going to do a couple little activities, okay? So this is a real simple book. Okay, here we go, called Super Submarines. All right. A submarine's a type of boat that dives beneath the sea. Below the waves is such a strange and wondrous place to be. To dive, it takes in water until its tanks are full. The weight of water gives the submarine a downward pull. When it's underwater, the propeller makes a go. The hydroplanes can tilt to steer it up or down like so. The rudder also steers the sub and turns it left or right. Computers help navigate. Down deep, there's not much light. Right here, the periscope can poke above the waves to peer around, but further down the submarine depends on sonar sound. The sonar sends a signal out, a special type of beep that bounces back to help them guess what's out there in the deep. And there are different animals that use sonar also. A submarine must have a crew to run it night and day. The crew needs living quarters where they eat and rest and play. Submersibles are different subs that probe the deepest ocean. Down that far, it's still and dark. There's hardly any motion. But even there, submersibles discover deep-sea creatures that glow or carry lanterns and have very funny features. Submersibles are used to rescue divers or explore. They sometimes salvage sunken wrecks upon the ocean floor. They're used to service oil rigs, lay cables and fix pipes. Their robot subs have cameras and arms of many types. So these robot subs can go into places that a big submarine wouldn't be able to get to, and even maybe a human wouldn't be able to get to. But look, our sub is rising. Its work below is done. Very soon, the busy crew will see the sky and sun. Its ballast tanks have emptied. They've pushed the water out. The submarine is back in dock. Hooray, the sailors shout. All right, so a submarine can float on water, and when it wants to go underneath, it has to add some more weight to it. So it fills up, it has tanks on the side, ballast tanks that fill up with water. Yesterday we watched a little SciShow Kids. Remember the ducks did an experiment and we talked about density. We're gonna watch kind of part 2 of that, and it's gonna explain how submarines work, okay? And then I'm gonna show you, I have a little submarine that I'm gonna show you, okay? So I'm gonna share this with you and I'll be back in just a moment.
Really? And then what happened? That's great. Squeaks was just telling me about a story he was reading. It was about a submarine exploring the ocean. You want to go on a submarine too? That sounds like it could be a lot of fun. Maybe someday we could visit a submarine. Actually, a viewer named Sam sent us a question about submarines not too long ago. Submarines are kind of like boats, except they go under the water. And Sam wanted to know more about how they do that. And Squeaks does too. Well, submarines work because of the way things sink and float, and some really smart thinking. You probably know that when you put things in water, some of them float to the top and some of them sink to the bottom. We did an experiment to learn why things float or sink with our friends Bill and Webb. Do you remember that, Squeaks? We learned that whether something floats depends on its density, or how heavy it is for its size. If it's heavier for its size than water, it sinks. If it's lighter, it floats. For example, a plastic spoon isn't very heavy for its size, so it floats. But a metal spoon is pretty heavy for its size, so it sinks. That's how boats float too. They're really heavy. You wouldn't be able to just pick one up, but they're not actually very heavy compared to how big they are. They're not very dense, so they float. And submarines can float on top of the water for the same reason. But for a submarine to be able to go under the water, it needs some of that really smart thinking I mentioned earlier. To dive into the water, a submarine needs to become heavier for its size. It needs to be more dense. But it's not so easy to make something heavier when you're in the middle of the ocean. That's why submarines have big tanks called ballast tanks. When it's time for the submarine to dive down, the ballast tanks open up so they fill with water. Adding the weight of the water to the submarine makes it dense enough to sink. You can see how this works if you have an empty bottle or jar and a bowl of water. At first, if you put the bottle or jar in the water, it will float because the only thing inside it is air. It's very light for its size, so it's not very dense. But if you take the cap off and let the water in from the bowl, it will sink. The water makes it heavier for its size, just like putting water into the ballast tanks on a submarine does. The rest of the submarine is very strong and sealed up tight, so water can't get in, and so that if there are people on the submarine, they can breathe. To make sure they don't run out of air, they bring along extra air that's all squeezed together inside a bottle, like how you squeeze air into a bicycle tire when you pump it up. And then they can go exploring under the water, just like the people in the story Squeaks was reading. In real life, we use submarines for all kinds of things, including learning more about the oceans. When scientists send submarines under the water, they find so many cool animals. There are jellyfish, octopuses, crabs, fish, and tons of animals we've never even seen before. But after the submarine is done exploring under the water, there's one more thing it needs to be able to do. Maybe you've already guessed what it is. We know how submarines dive under the water, but how do they get back up? Well, remember how submarines bring along extra air? If there are people on the submarine, they can use it to breathe, but it's not only for breathing. When it's time for the submarine to go back up to the surface, it pushes air into the ballast tanks and water out. That makes the submarine lighter for its size, so it can float up to the top of the water. It really is a very smart way of using science to explore the world. Thanks for joining us. If you have more questions about submarines or exploring the oceans or anything.
Okay, so submarines are pretty cool because they can both sink and float, depending on what they want to do. Now, we have a lot of military around us, right? We have shipyards, and then, so I bet some of you know somebody, a friend or family member that has either worked on building or taking care of the submarines or has actually been on a submarine in the military. So that is pretty cool. If you want to share about that, you can stay on afterwards and we can talk about that, okay? All right, so I'm going to show you really quickly. I have a little submarine. And how it works is, let's see if I can show you here. So I have a submarine and it is filled with air, right? There's no water in here. So what should happen when I put it in the water? It should float. Now, this is cool because you guys can see this water line here. So I don't have ballast tanks on here, but I do have a hole in the top that I can fill with water. So if I fill some with water, can you see how it is sinking? It's not all the way to the bottom yet, but I can add some more. And real submarines do this. They can determine how deep they want to go based on how much they fill up their ballast tanks. So if I fill it all the way up, see the bubbles coming out? That's the air, so there's no more air in there. So now it can explore the ocean floor. So it can go do what it needs to do. And when it's done, it's going to push out all of that water. Slowly but surely. And it can rise to the top. So it's pretty neat how a submarine can actually work like that. Now, we just had a holiday, Easter, and I bet a lot of you hunted for some eggs. Now, Easter eggs make some fun little submarines. So if you have any extra Easter eggs laying around, you can try this. It's going to float in the water because it's full of air. So what's going to happen if I fill it with water? I'm going to put it down here. I'll snap it back in. And it is going underwater. It's definitely heavier, but it can't get to the bottom yet, right? So it couldn't explore the ocean floor if it was a real submarine. So what you can do is try to experiment with what can you do to this to make it go to the bottom. Are there any things around the house that you could add to it, maybe along with water or just without water to make it sink to the bottom? So that's one little activity you can do with an egg. You can also make a cute little submarine with an egg. So I had a hole, so I stuffed a part of a straw in there and I just drew on some windows and a propeller in the back. And I can do the same thing. I can make it go and I can play with certain amounts of water to get it to where my periscope would be out. Because the cool thing about a periscope is nobody can see the submarine coming, right? All there is that tiny little periscope up top, and the rest of it is submerged underwater. So that's another thing you can make with an Easter egg. All right. What we're going to do next is I'm going to show you how to draw your own submarine out of a few simple shapes. So if you guys have some paper, pencil, crayons, something like that, go ahead and grab that. And this is real simple. All right. And again, I'll answer all your questions and stay on chat after class, okay? Okay, so if you have a piece of paper, it can be lined paper, plain paper. If you can turn it sideways, it's going to give you more space. Okay, and in the middle, I want you to make an oval. And that's going to be our submarine. All right, in the center of the submarine, I want you to make a circle. And that's going to be one of our porthole windows. And on the right and the left, you can make another circle. So now we've got our windows. All right, on the top, we're going to make two little diagonal lines that come towards each other. 1, 2. And then I'm going to connect them. All right, on top of this, I'm going to make the number 7 kind of straight. And underneath it, I'm going to make a little number 7. I can connect those at the top with a circle, and that is my periscope. So I can see out. All right, in the back, I'm going to make 2 little lines. And then I'm going to draw a triangle. Now, it doesn't have to be a real pointy triangle, I'm going to do my straight line to connect those, but make it a little bigger. And then I'll make my point out. On the top, I'm going to make the letter V. And it kind of looks like an ice cream cone, so I'm going to give it a little scoop of ice cream. And that's going to be my top propeller. Okay, on the bottom, I'm going to make an upside down V and an upside down scoop of ice cream. And that'll be my bottom propeller. Okay, next, I'm going to make some ballast tanks that I could fill up with water. So I'm just going to make a tank like this on the side of it. And we need some water because we want our submarine to be in the water. So we want the submarine part to be submerged, but we want our periscope to be above water. So let's make our water line so that all you can see is a little bit of the periscope. And when I dropped my submarine into the water, did you guys see all those bubbles coming up? The propeller is also going to cause some bubbles. So to make some bubbles, you can start with small circles and they can get bigger as they go towards the surface of the water. All right, then you can be creative. You can add people in the windows. You can add fish or sharks or an octopus, some mermaids swimming around, whatever you want to do to decorate your submarine. I know yours will look better than mine. And you can color them in too. All right, you guys want to hold up what you've got? We can see, and then you can add details to it. Ooh. Oh, these look really cool. So that was a super simple way to make a submarine. So these ballast tanks are going to fill up with water so it can go down, and then it's going to push it out so it can rise back up to the top. All right, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to let people share in just a second. On Thursday, we are going to be learning about a famous underwater explorer. And you know how we learned about how people actually live in outer space? There are people who can live underwater in labs to do some research. So we're going to learn a little bit about that. And then we might check in with Ingenuity. The helicopter just flew for the first time on Mars. So if you haven't seen that, we'll see what's going on there. Okay. Awesome job, you guys. I love your pictures. Those are super cool. All right. If you want to stay and test out, some of you made the foil boats to test out. If you want to do that, if you have questions or comments, then please stay. And everybody else, thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you back on Thursday, okay? All right. Bye, guys.